It's a beautiful morning here in the village of Nagakot in Nepal. This morning I'm sharing a teaching with a church from Mark chapter 14 verses 3 to 9. In this teaching we read about a beautiful act of worship. It's where Mary breaks an alabaster flask of really expensive perfume and anoints Jesus with it. It's such a beautiful act of worship, but there's also some critics, and the critics, very interestingly, are disciples, are other believers, and perhaps you yourself are feeling criticised, and it really hurts because it's people in your church, it's the people that you feel should be behind you. Just be aware that it may be other disciples that are critics. So we need to watch out not to become the critics ourselves. And there are three characteristics of the critics that we see in this passage. The first characteristic is the critics are doing nothing themselves. They're kind of sat at the table taking no risks. Mary comes into a public scene as a woman. She makes herself really vulnerable, makes herself really humble, and does this act of public worship. She's the one taking the risk. The critics are just sat there doing nothing. This is where the phrase armchair critics comes useful, because they really are armchair critics, or perhaps you could call them table critics, but whatever we call them, they're not doing anything themselves. The second characteristic of the critics is that they speak harshly. In verse 5 it says they scolded Mary. That's a phrase that kind of means a sharp telling off. It's a way that you'd speak to a child. They were sharp, their words are negative. So just be aware of how you speak to other people as well. If you've got something to challenge someone over, keep it gentle, keep it kind, be patient, be humble with them. Don't be one of the critics. And the third characteristic of the critics is that they try and make themselves sound good. I think that's why they become critics. People like to take the position of critic because it makes them feel good about themselves. Look how good I am, she's making a mistake, I'm doing well. And what do they say? They say, couldn't this perfume have been sold and the money given to the poor? What a self-righteous thing to say. And in fact, in the Gospel of John, we read the same story and we discover that there's a ringleader of this criticism, and it's Judas Iscariot, the same Judas that betrayed Jesus. And we also read that Judas wasn't that bothered about the poor. In fact, the reason he was concerned about money is that he was a thief, he'd been taking from the money bag. But he still uses words to try and make himself sound good. And often when people are criticising us, they may be using the Bible, they may be using things that are right and truthful, and it can make the criticism all the more cutting. But what matters in the end of the day is what Jesus says. Jesus says to Mary, she has done a beautiful thing for me, leave her alone. He speaks that over her, and that's the thing that matters. When we're being criticised, just look, what does Jesus speak over us?